So if we have integrity, then we have completely different rules. So we will look at one integrity model in second part of access control. Right. So this is the second part. Cover different models. We will look at some again concepts and the theoretical aspects of the access control. And after we finish this part, we will look at the access control in Unix and in Windows systems. So we first look at how basically in the VLP we already looked at how to define the secure state of the system. So essentially that means if the system is in a secure state, then all the rules specified in the policy are satisfied. So then we will look at how, for example, to formally prove a system is in a secure state. So we will look at some simple example to illustrate this idea. Then we will look at integrity-based models, access control models. So the VLP actually is a confidentiality-based security model. That means we want to prevent unauthorized disclosure of information. Integrity means we want to prevent unauthorized modification of the information. Then the rules will be completely different. We will look at some integrity-based models, and then we will look at this one. This one is the multilateral model. That means it's a multi-dimension. It's no longer a single dimension. Right, so this is the extension. For example, lattice model is the extension of the VLP to capture multi-dimension. And then we will also look at some other model, like the Chinese wall model, and so on. Right, so the security model, why we define these kind of models? Because the advantage or the good part of using a security model is abstract. It's not associated with any specific implementation or system. So you can apply the abstract model in a variety of application domains, right? So that's the first advantage. And then the second advantage actually is we can do some generic analysis. We can have some approach defined based on this abstract model, right? So actually, if you study 361 or you will study the subject later. So we also have a security model defined for encryption or signature, right? If you later probably will study for the encryption, we have the so-called IND-CPA or semantic security model. So that's again a very abstract model that can be applied to all the encryption schemes. Then we can also develop the definitions and the method, for example, to prove the encryption is secure. Right? Here is similar. We can define an abstract model, like a DLP model, like a Viva model, and so on, for access control. And then later, actually, we can also define, for example, what is the method to prove the system is secure. So it's essentially the same idea. So we can basically present an abstract model applicable to all the different systems, implementations, and then we can develop method to formally prove the system is in a secure state, right? So essentially, we still follow the same approach I mentioned in the previous lecture. We use the state transition, you can say state transition diagram or state machine to represent the system. So essentially, you will define the system as a sequence of state. So you have the current state of the system. The state means current state means Alice is reading file 1, Bob is writing to file 2, Carol is executing program 1, and so on. So this is current state, right? So then you can define the state transition, right? For example, when you create a new object, or when you now maybe Alice now start to modify the file instead of reading the file. So actually you can have a state transition from one state to another state. So during this transition, basically what we need to ensure is that all the rules are not violated. That means when you want to do such a state transition, you need to check if the rules, the policies will be violated. If this will be violated, then you basically this kind of transition you should not allow. That means all the transitions allowed by the system must make sure the state will remain secure. So during the transition from one state to another state, you need to ensure all the policies are enforced. So this is basically how we can prove, say, a system will always be in a secure state, right? So this is somehow like a mathematical induction, right? So you prove the I step is correct, then it implies I plus 1 step is incorrect. And if you have initial step which is correct, then that means the whole theorem is correct. Or if you look at something called in programming, we have a so-called loop invariant, right? Have you heard this term? Loop invariant. You prove your program is correct. That means when you do the loop, you prove something is always true. At the beginning is true, during each loop is true, eventually that means that when you execute the loop it's also true. So the same concept actually can be used in different places. So here for the state machine or state transition, we can still use this approach to show the system is always in a secure state. Anyway, this part is just for information, so you don't expect this part will be examined. So in the security model, for example, if we look at some traditional security model, we can have the subjects, objects, right? And then you can have the security attributes, right? Security attributes can be related to the labels or the actions. And then basically you can, after you define, have this kind of system, then you can prove. So if you want to show that the system is secure, you can prove that actually the state of the machine, this particular system, will always remain secure by following the method I just described. So you define the appropriate state variables, right, and then the relationships between them. For example, the state variables can be the subjects, objects, and then you have the actions, right? So these are the variables. Then you set the relationship between them. Maybe A is reading. A is the subject, O is object, action is the read. So you can define the relation. Right, then you can define the definition of a secure state. For example, in the DLP model, the definition of a secure state means that in the current state, all the operations performed by the objects, by the subjects against objects, they satisfy no read up, no write up, and also discretionary access control. So if say all the current actions performed in the system, they follow the policy. That means the system is in a secure state. Then you can define the state transition functions. Use the whole set of possible state transition functions. And then after you define the state transition function, then you need to prove, basically similar as in the mathematical induction, you prove that for a secure state, if you take some state transition function, it will still make the system in a secure state for the next step. So for any transition, so the state, it will bring the system to a new state which is still secure. So you prove that if the I state is secure, I plus 1 state will still be secure. Similar as in mathematical induction. So then you define initial state, that means step 0. You show the initial state is secure, then actually you prove the system will always be secure because you have shown that for the transition it will keep the system in a secure state. So this is basically how we can use the model to prove. Anyway, so this is just some general idea how we can prove. Similar as in cryptography, we can also use the abstract model to prove encryption is secure, right? So we can do something like that. Okay, so basically we can for example, this is a very simple example. Let's start of a example for this kind of a state using the state machine approach, right? So you can have subjects, objects. Right, so these are, you can define basically the relationship between these subjects and objects and also the actions. And then you can define the conditions for a secure state. Right, so if the system is in a secure state, that means that all these rules are satisfied. Right, then you define the transition function and you prove that for any possible transition, if the system is secure, in a secure state, for any possible transition, the next state is still secure. So in that case, you prove the system will always remain secure. So this is how we can do the how do the proof for security. And then BLP actually is a confidentiality-based model, so it follows you can use the previous a state transition approach to prove, say, the system is in a secure state with regards to confidentiality, right? Because BLP, the rules are to ensure confidentiality is preserved. That means sensitive data will not be disclosed to unauthorized user. So you prevent data from flowing from high level to low level. So data cannot flow from high level to low level. So this is a confidentiality-based access control. And then if you look at integrity, then basically the rules actually can be different. So integrity means that we don't care about the secrecy of the data. We want to make sure the data is not modified by unauthorized user. So we don't care about whether the data can be accessed can be read by other people or not. We look at the integrity. That means that people cannot modify. Unauthorized people, they cannot modify the important data, right? So here basically the rules actually will be different. So if you look at the BLP, so it's no read up, no write up. Then for this Viva model, it's no write up, no read up, right? So it's the opposite. So the operations now include modify, which is the write, observe, which is read. So we use different terms, but essentially they are referring to the same operations. Then you can have execute and invoke, right? So execute is the same as in the BLP, and invoke means that one process can invoke another process. And then the rule here actually is the reverse of BLP. No write up, no read down. So now basically what you need to consider here for these two rules is in BLP, we want to prevent data from flowing from high level to low level. Here, actually, we want to prevent data from flowing from low level to high level. That means that if you have some data in the low level document, we don't want this data to flow to high level. So that's why actually now we have no write up, no read down. Right? So no write up is again straightforward, because a lower rank officer should not be able to modify the higher level document. No write up. So why no read down? Because if the higher rank officer can read low level document, then the higher rank officer will be influenced by the content in the low level document. And subsequently, when this officer writes to a high level document, data essentially will flow up from low level to high level. So essentially here, we want to prevent data from flowing through high level to low level to high level. It's just the opposite of the BLP. BLP, we want to make sure data will not flow from high level to low level, because this is confidentiality. By integrity, we want to make sure data will not flow from low level to high level. So the direction is opposite. That's why the rules are also opposite. So no write up, no read down. Right? No write up is straightforward. We prevent low rank officer to modify high level file. But no read down means that we should prevent high rank officer to be influenced by the content in the low level documents. Right? So that's how the Viva model works. Actually, in Windows Vista and Windows 7, actually we have something similar as the Viva model. So we have 6 integrity levels defined in the Windows system, and then we follow the rule of this Viva model. Right. So here are some explanations. Right. So we have basically the simple integrity and the integrity confinement, and then for this one we also have the last property, which is the invocation property. Alright, so for the integrity confinement, basically this is a no write-up policy. So you cannot write to a file with a higher level, and then the simple integrity is no read-down. It means you should not be influenced by a low-level document and then subsequently modify a high-level document. So this is similar as in the court cases, sometimes the juries will be asked to disregard or ignore some evidence, right? So basically, because people will be influenced if this evidence actually they are not formal or they are not justified, but people can still be influenced, right? So in this case, the judge will ask the juries to ignore or to basically to disregard all those evidence or materials. So in this case, it's similar as the no read down policy here. So we want to prevent high-level user to be influenced by the content in the low-level document. And then we also have the invocation property. So if one subject wants to invoke or execute another subject, then the subject S1 must have a high level of integrity, high integrity level than the subject 2. So this is again, this one is quite straightforward, right? So basically, all these rules are still just for the static case, but for the dynamic case, actually, it's even more complex. So for the dynamic case, actually, the levels can change. The levels can change when you basically, if there is some action performed, then the levels actually can change. So if you want to read more content, actually, you can go to the first reference book by Bishop. In that book, actually, there are some content about the dynamic model for integrity. So that's the first integrity model we want to look at. So this is so the first integrity model. So the BIVA model is basically the opposite, the reverse of the BRP model, because we want to make sure information will not flow up in that multi-level model. So BIVA is also a multi-level model, and the DLP is also a multi-level model, because we have multiple levels defined for different subjects and objects. And then this Clark-Wilson model is also an integrity model, but it's not like a multi-level model. So here we just, because we are talking about integrity, so we just briefly introduce this one. So it's we just quickly go through this one. So this is model developed for commercial applications, not for military applications. So essentially, we want to make sure the integrity. We want to ensure the integrity of the transactions in commercial applications. Right. So actually, the model can be summarized by this picture. So from the textbook. So basically, this picture illustrates how integrity will be ensured during a transaction, like of a commercial application. Right. So for the transaction, so again we have the state transition. Right. We again have the state transition. So this is, for example, the system in current state. Then a transaction will transform the system from the current state to the next state. So we want to ensure the integrity of the data during this transition, right? So basically here we have the two types of rules. One is called the certification rules, and one is called the enforcement rule. Enforcement rules are the rules that will essentially achieve the goals set by the certification rules, right? So the certification rules are the goals, and the enforcement rules are the actions that will enforce the certification rules. Right, so here we have so-called constrained data items. So these are you can consider these as secure data items, like the data item that with integrity. Right, so you can also have an unconstrained data item. For example, this is data from user from external world outside the system. Then we call this an unconstrained data item. So basically, any transaction will turn the constrained data item to a constrained data item. That means the integrity of constrained data item will not be affected. On the other hand, we will also make sure the unconstrained data item will turn to a constrained data item in any transaction. Right. So this basically this is what we want to achieve, and then how to enforce the integrity. So we have the other rules. For example, you must make sure the transactions can only be done authenticated and authorized to the user, right? So you can have for example, you can have authentication using, for example, you can use different method we studied to do authentication. And then you can use, for example, the ACM or other rules to ensure the transaction can only be done by authorized user, right? So, and also basically here you need to, for example, keep the logs, right? So you need to keep the logs to make sure every transaction actually we have the log, so that later we can verify the integrity of the data, right? So this is basically one model for commercial application, but in some sense it's less formal compared with the previous BLP and BIPA, because BLP and BIPA we have very clear rules, and then we have the levels and so on. This one is more like a less formal in a less formal way to define this integrity. But this is another integrity model used in like a commercial applications. Okay, so we looked at some multi-level access control for confidentiality and a multi-level access control for integrity. However, so far we only look at a single dimension, single domain, right? Because we only look at we have clearly defined levels in single dimension. Top secret is higher than secret, secret is higher than confidential, and so on. However, so in real scenario, we may not have we may have even more complex system. For example, so you may have some data shared across different units, like a different department. And each department, actually, they can have their own levels defined. For example, Department A, I can say I define the levels using top secret, secret, confidential, unclassified. Level B, I can just simply say I define the level, only define two levels, high and low. Right, so Department C, say I can define the levels, say in a different way. I define I use 1, 2, 3, 4 to indicate the level, right? So in this case, so we can have different labels used by different columns here, different dimensions. Each dimension you can have the labels, but now for the shared data, we need to enforce the access control across multiple departments or multiple dimensions. So in this case, we want to make sure the access control actually will be preserved with regards to all the dimensions. If we say someone is allowed to access the object, then this will actually be so the security policy defined by all the dimensions will be satisfied. So that's the multi-lateral or multi-dimensional model we will consider. So this is you can consider this is like an extension of the single dimension case. Right. So now basically, if we want to have in the BLP model, we have this like a tree structure. Right. So actually, we only have one dimension. If you still remember the picture, we only have one dimension. But for this multilateral model, so essentially we have a more complex structure. So the structure we have a name. We call it a lattice model. So lattice, actually, you may heard this term in other contexts. For example, in 361, you may heard the lattice-based cryptography. So the lattice there is or more on the mathematical side. It's essentially a vector space, right? But here, essentially, actually the structure is still similar because we are talking about a multi-dimensional structure. It's essentially a vector space. You can consider this a vector space, but we don't really look at the mathematics. So here, the lattice model is easier to understand compared with the lattice in cryptography. Anyway, so we use the so-called lattice to define this multi-dimension access control, and then this is an extension of the BLP. Because BLP, we only have one column. We have the levels defined in one column. And now we can have multiple columns for different units or departments. Okay, so however, so the lattice model, as a remark here, is it is still a confidential model. That means we want to prevent data to flow, prevent data from flowing from high level to low level. Right, so it's again a confidentiality-based model. But If you want, you can also define a lattice model for integrity-based access control. But we will just use this confidentiality model as an example. Okay, so in the VLP model, we have clear ordering for the levels. But for lattice, now this ordering becomes less straightforward, right? So in this case, actually, we need to define something called a partial order. So we need to define, for example, if we want to consider the level across multi-dimension, which one is high, which one is low. So in this case, you may not be able to compare any two levels. So sometimes you can have two levels which are incomparable, right? So because in one dimension you always have a strict order, but if you consider multiple dimensions, you can have two levels which are incomparable. So you will see some idea later. If I show the picture, you understand the idea. So in the lattice model here, actually we need to basically the definition is based on these two questions. So given two objects at different security levels, what is the lowest security level a subject must have in order to read the object, right? And then given two subjects at different levels, what is the highest level security level an object can have, so that it still can be read by both subjects. Right, so why these questions are important? Because they are related to another very important principle in security, which is a principle of least privilege. So what does this principle mean? It means when we try to assign the permission to users, we only assign the least privilege that allows the user to finish the task. Right, so that essentially means that we don't assign additional or extra privilege than required to complete the task. Right, so this is basically the principle of least privilege. So if we have some way that can achieve the least principle of least privilege, then we can answer these two questions. Because they are talking about the least level required by subject to read or process the subject. Right, so basically here is the definition. So this is different from the lattice definition in mathematics. So if you look at the lattice definition in mathematics, it's essentially a vector space, right? So here, although the structure is similar, but here we use this definition is less mathematical, right? So a lattice consists of a set and then a partial order, right? So the partial order now is used to define which one is high, which one is low, right? So basically, the least upper bound and the greatest bound, these are the requirements to these are the two requirements for structure to be a lattice. That means if you want to have if you call a structure as a lattice, then this structure must have least upper bound and the greatest lower bound for every two elements. If you pick any two elements, you can find the least upper bound and the greatest lower bound. But here, these two elements may be incomparable. Right, so if you have you look at the VLP, it's very straightforward. Every two elements are comparable. For example, A is higher than B, then the least upper bound is A. For A and B, least upper bound is A, greatest lower bound is B, because you have a strict order. But for the lattice, we may not have a strict order. That's why we call it partial order, because sometimes the two levels are incomparable. But we want to make sure for any two levels, they must have a least upper bound and the greatest lower bound, right? So what is the meaning of a least upper bound? That means this is a minimum upper bound, right? So basically, if we say U is the least upper bound, so if for any V which is higher than A and B, then V must be higher than or equal to U. So this is basically the least upper bound, right? This is similar as a least common multiple in mathematics, right? You have integers, two integers, you can have the least common multiple that actually can divide both integers. And then the greatest lower bound is basically the largest lower bound. That means L is the greatest lower bound. If for any k which is smaller than or equal to a and b, then L will be greater than or equal to a. So this is something similar to the greatest common divisor, right? You have the biggest integer that can divide both a and b, right? So these two definitions you can maybe link to those two definitions in like mathematics, right? So why we want to have these two bounds? Because they can answer the two questions we just asked, right? So later we will see why. For example, so if you want to have assign a level to a subject which can read two subjects in a confidentiality model, then essentially you need to find the least upper bound. That means the smallest upper bound, the smallest level higher than both subjects. In this case, you can read both subjects, right? So that's essentially the idea why we want to have this kind of least upper bound and the greatest lower bound, right? So for all this partial order, so we should have we need to have the partial order should satisfy three properties, right? So this first is reflexive. That means A is less than or equal to A, and anti-symmetric. If A less than B, B less than A, then A is equal to B. And the third one is transitive. If A less than B, B less than C, then A will be less than or equal to C. Right. So these are the properties we need to satisfy for this partial order. Right. So in general, if B is greater than or equal to A, we say B dominates A. Essentially means that B is higher, or B has a higher or equal level than A. So let's look at one example. So in this case, so because we are having multi-dimension, right? So in this case, we just consider two dimension, two columns. So in the first column, we have two levels, say private and public. And the private is higher than public. And the second part, actually we use a special way to define the order. So we say A is higher than B if A is a superset of B. So if B is a subset of A, then B is lower than A, right? So we use this, for the second column, now we use this rule to define the order, right? So a superset will dominate a subset, okay? So now basically we need to consider both rules, both levels. We need to look at both dimensions, right? So the lowest level, of course, the first dimension you have private and public, then public is the lowest. And then if you use a set, like the superset dominates the subset, then the empty set actually has the lowest level, right? So in this case, then you can have lattice like this, right? So for the first column, so we have a private dominate public, and for the second, we have a superset dominate a subset. So now let's look at the order. So this one, for example, here, pub and this P will dominate this one. So the arrow pointing to the dominating element, right? So pub and P will dominate this one. Why? Because pub is equivalent to pub, but this P will dominate the empty set. So overall, this one will dominate the bottom one. And then if you look at this one, pub again dominate pub, and PE, this is a superset of P, it will again dominate this pub and P. And here, private actually dominate pub, and P is equal to P, so this one, private P, will dominate public P. Alright, so you can basically now define the order based on two dimensions, not just one dimension. However, so in this case, we may have some incomparable items. Right, so you can simply find two incomparable items. For example, this private one, an empty set, and a public one with two elements here. Because private is higher than public, but the empty set is lower than this full set. Then these two become incomparable. We no longer have a strict order. So that's why we only have a partial order. We don't have a strict order anymore, because we can have elements here, they don't dominate each other because we have two dimensions. First dimension, this one is private dominate public, but the second dimension, this empty set, is lower than this full set. So in this case, we can have two items that are incomparable, right? So, however, if you look at the whole structure, actually the two rules, the two bounds are still there. For any two items, you can always find the least upper bound and the greatest lower bound, right? So that means that this forms a lattice, because no matter which two objects, so if you find any two objects, for example this one and this one, then you can always find the least upper bound. This one and this one, you can find the greatest lower bound. So any two items, you can find the least upper bound and the greatest lower bound. Then this forms a lattice, right? So that's a simple example illustrating this lattice, right? So basically, why we need to care about these two bounds, because we can answer these two questions easily if we have a lattice. The first question, so we need to assign basically the subject, the least upper bound to the subject, right? So the second question, the answer should be a greatest lower bound, right? So they can basically enforce, they can allow us to achieve the so-called principle of least privilege. So there are three important principles we studied so far. One is the principle of attenuation of privilege. If you want to grant privilege of permission, you must first have the privilege of permission. Second one is default deny instead of default allow. Third one is the principle of least privilege. So you only assign the minimum privilege required to complete a task to a subject. Right, so more on partial order. So here actually the order, now the order is not that straightforward. So we can define the order using any definition. Right, so for example, if you have three people, and if you order them alphabetically, then you have Alex dominate Alice, Alice dominate Bob. But say if you order them just by the initial, then Alice and Alex actually they have the same level, because they both start from A. Okay, so maybe I can give you some, as I said, maybe I can give you some hints about assignment 1, this part, right? So for this part, so now actually I give you a ACM, but from this ACM I want you to construct a lattice, right? So this ACM is generated based on the BLP, the lattice model following the BLP. So BLP means no read up, no write down, right? So in this case, suppose so subject can read object 1. That means in the lattice, what's the relative position of S1 according to O1? If S1 can read O1 in the according to the BLP model, the rule, S1 must be higher than O1, right? So in this case, if we look at this one, so if you look at the first cell, because the assumption here is this access control matrix follows the BLP rule. That means S1 can read O1. That means S1 will dominate O1. S1 will be higher than O1, right? And then say S1 can read and write O6 according to the BLP rule. This means S1 and O6, which one is higher, which one is low? Compare S1 with O6. Which one is higher? If you can read and write, that means you actually have the equivalence level here. Because only when you have the same level, you can read and write, right? So that means actually O6 should have the same level as O1. So you can put them in one box. And then you can follow this, then you can essentially, you can continue. If you follow all the rules here, then maybe you can find some, for example, here maybe another one. S2 can write to O4, right? So if S2 can only write to O4, right here means basically append. So here if S2 can only write to O4, then O4 is higher than S2, right? O4 is then higher than S2. So basically here if you have O4, then it will be higher than S2. S2 will be dominated by O4. So basically if you follow this, essentially you will come up with a structure with different arrows pointing from one box to another box. So this one, if they are the same, you can put them in the same box, right? So maybe there are some other objects, you can put them in the same box. Essentially, if you follow all the rules here, you will come up with a lattice. However, you need to pay attention. For the lattice, we need to make sure every two subjects, every two boxes or items must have a least upper bound and the greatest lower bound. So what happens if, say, eventually say you come up with something like this, right? So what happens if you come up with something like this? So in this case, this is not a lattice because, for example, these two, they don't have a greatest lower bound, right? So in this case, if say you come up a structure like this, what you need to do is you need to add some dummy items to make this lattice. Because if you cannot find a least upper bound or greatest lower bound for any two objects, that means this is not a lattice. So if say eventually you draw a picture and then you find, okay, some items they don't have a least upper bound or greatest lower bound, you need to add a dummy box there. Okay, so that's something you need to pay attention. So the last sentence here, be sure to add a label as necessary to ensure this is a lattice. That means that if there is no common like an upper bound or lower bound, you need to add a dummy label there to make sure this is a lattice. Right. So this is essentially the what you need to provide is a completed picture. So this is like a starting point. You can complete the picture by following all the rules here. Right? We follow the VLP rule. That means if S1 can read O1, then here if I don't put right, that means S1 can only read O1. S1 can only read O1. That means S1 must be strictly higher than O1 because if S1 can read the right, if S1 is equivalent to O1, then S1 can read and write.
So yes. Then S2, how do you know if it can read or write O2, O3?
S2 here, if I have nothing, that means S2 can do nothing to O2 or O3.
Are we supposed to copy the table?
No, you don't need to copy. Here means that you can do nothing. You have no access at all. Okay? So essentially it means these two items, they are incomparable. If they are incomparable, you cannot read, you cannot write. You get what I mean?
And then that O1, O6, S1, O6, what's that mean?
So this one means S1, O6, they are higher than O1. They dominate O1.
Is it because O6 is highest because it can write?
No, it's not because O6 is the highest. It's because S1 is higher than O1. Right? Because S1 can read O1. That means S1 is higher than O1. S1 can read write O6. That means O6 and S1 they have the same level. Right? That's why S1 and O6 you can put them together because they are at the same level, and they are both higher than O1 because S1 is higher than O1. Yes?
So if there's another one, like, let's say that another one which is like lower than S1 and O5, so I need to create another box for S1.
Sorry, again.
So if let's say there's another one which is lower than S1 and O5, so I have to go and create another box, S1 and O5. If let's say.
S1, no. If say you are talking about like some other item which has the same level as S1?
No, as in like it is not the same level as O6, but it's the same level as S1 and O5. But it's not the same level as O6.
No, if some item has the same level as S1, it must have the same level as O6, right? So,
yeah.
You get what I mean? if you find another object which has the same as S1 or O6, that means you can put the object here as well. You can put the item here as well, because they must have the same level. So essentially, you need to draw a picture like this. So this is just a starting point. So later you need to figure out, okay, what are the other objects, what are the arrows, and eventually you can come up with a lattice. So the lattice will be maybe more like have a similar structure as this one, but maybe more complex than this one. Okay, so that's what you need to. Sorry, what? Yeah. You need to have the all the arrows, and you also need to indicate for example, if you have two items with the same level, you need to put them together. What?
The shape of it.
Yeah. So no. Yeah. Basically, if you can put the structure in a clear way, then that's fine. So you don't need to follow exactly the same. Like this is this is like you said, like a cube, but you don't need to follow this one. So essentially, eventually the structure may be different from this one, but you need to make sure you have the arrows placed correctly, right? So try to make sure you put the higher one at the top and the lower one at the bottom. So don't put arrows. You have arrow from bottom to up, and then you have arrow from top to bottom, because this will make the lattice very difficult to understand. You try to always put the arrow up. Okay, don't put the arrow both up and down. Then the lattice will be difficult to read, difficult to understand. Okay, so that's for the last question. This is the last remaining question for assignment 1. So this one is very straightforward. So I think you can answer this one very easily. Yes?
So from that picture, right, it means that S1 dominates O1, but then S1, O4 is dominates S1.
O4 is what?
O4 dominates S1.
O4 dominates S2 here, right? And then S1 actually dominates O4, right? So you can see here. O4 dominates S2 because S2 can only append to O4. And then S1 actually can read O4. That means S1 actually is. So if you look at the table, for this box and this one, which one is higher? This one is higher. Why? Because S1 can read O4, that means S1 must be higher than O4. So actually you can have draw an arrow here, right? So you just follow this matrix to complete the diagram. Okay, any other question? Sorry? O1 and so it depends, right? So later you need to find out if somewhere you can figure out O1 and O4 they are the same, you can group them together. But if you cannot find some relation, you cannot find some clue here which shows O1 equal to O4, you separate them. But if you can find some clue saying actually O1 and O4 they are at the same level, then you can group them, right? So that's basically what you need to do for this exercise, right? Any other question? Lecture. Okay, so we looked at this lattice model, which is essentially extension of DLT. So now we consider multi-dimensional. That means now basically the label attached to one object or subject contain multiple items. So we have multiple columns, and each column we can have labels, right? So in this case, if you want to assign a label to an object, you need to have a multi-dimension label. That means you have different individual labels attached to this particular object or subject. And lattice-based model is still a confidentiality model. That means we still consider the secrecy of the information. However, so that means we still have this no read up and no write down policy because we are talking about confidentiality. We want to prevent information from like flowing through high level to low level, right? But if you want to have like a multi-lecture model for integrity, then you can also do that. But basically, what you need to do is to extend the DIVA model to support multi dimensions. Right? So that means for the lattice model, so it's similar as the BLP. We still have this star property and the SS property, right? So no read up and no write down. So the one problem with this star property is so sometimes actually the high rank officer cannot pass information to lower level officer in this case because there is no channel that can allow information to flow from high level to low level, right? So in this case, how to address this problem? So if you remember in the lattice model, in the BLP model, actually we define two levels for the subject: current level and the default level. So actually you can assign a lower current level lower than the default level. In this case, then actually we allow this officer to write to like a low-level object or pass the information to low-level subjects. So that's why we actually define the current level and so that's one of the reasons. So one of the reasons we define the current level and the default level is to allow this kind of exception to be handled. And another reason is because we want to enforce like a principle of least privilege. So sometimes we don't assign the default level to the subject. We assign the minimum level required to complete the task. So the reason of introducing current level and default level is to handle these kind of situations. Right, so in general, so you just need to memorize these two sentences for the integrity and confidentiality. So confidentiality, we have no read up, no write down. Integrity, we have the opposite, no write up, no read down. Then you may ask, so if we only care about confidentiality or integrity, we can define a policy or the model. But if we want, what if we want to have both? Because both are important security properties. We want to have both confidentiality and integrity. Then how to make sure we can achieve both, right? Because the rules are opposite. So the idea actually is to use two lattices instead of one lattice. So basically you define two lattices. One lattice will have the labels for confidentiality. The other lattice will have labels for integrity. Now the object will have multiple labels. Like one label is for confidentiality, one label is for integrity. So now we need to make sure when the user wants to access the object, then both the confidentiality lattice and the integrity lattice are satisfied. So that's the approach we use, and this is exactly what this liveness model performs. So we define two lattices. One associated with integrity labels, and another one associated with confidentiality labels. So in this case, we can achieve both. We want to make sure both confidentiality and integrity can be achieved. So essentially, the idea is quite straightforward. So once you have integrity policy, you have confidentiality policy, then you just design some labels for each policy. For example, for confidentiality-based one, maybe we can use the first column, like top secret, secret, confidential, unclassified. But for the second and the third column, actually these are the labels you can use for integrity, right? Like very reliable or totally trusted and so on. So these are more on the integrity side. Okay, so if we look at the liveness model, so this model actually uses software development as an example, right? So for software development, so we want to ensure both confidentiality and integrity of the data, and probably also maybe the code, right? So in this case, For confidentiality, we can define the lattice. Define a lattice. So the lattice now basically contains two dimensions. So first dimension is defined based on the these two levels. So the audit manager is higher than system load. So this is a strict relation, a strict order. Alright, so this is the first dimension. Second dimension is basically the category. Right? So whether this is a production data, or this is development data, or this is system data. Right? So or whether this is a production program, or development program, or system program. So for the category, actually we use the same order we saw in the picture. So a superset will dominate subset. So if someone can access production code, development code, and the system code, then that person will dominate another person which can only access production data, for example, the end user. Right? So basically this part is based on the same idea. We have a superset dominate a subset. So if you can access more categories, you have higher level. If you have can access less category, you have lower level. And then based on these two dimensions, we can define a lattice. Right? So the first dimension we have these two levels. Second dimension we have the set relationship. So this is for confidentiality. Then for integrity, we can define another lattice. Right? Another lattice to enforce the integrity. But now we assign different labels, right? So in this case, the integrity. Now, for example, we can have the classifications. So system program dominates like a production program and development software, and then the lowest one is the system low, right? So for the category, we also have the development and the production, right? So in this case, we can define another lattice, two-dimensional lattice for the integrity. So now we need to ensure that all the confidentiality rules and integrity rules are enforced. That means we follow the two lattices, right? So we can assign the labels now to different subjects and objects. So for ordinary user, for example, for the confidentiality, we assign these two labels, right? So this is basically the classification. This is the category. And for the integrity, we also can have this is clearance, this is category, right? So we can now assign different labels for the ordinary user. So this is for confidentiality, this is for integrity. And then for the system controller, we can have a different set of labels for confidentiality and for the integrity. So we have two lattices, and each lattice is a two-dimensional lattice, right? So for the confidential lattice, you have two dimensions. And then this one you have also have two dimensions. So essentially, it's a very straightforward approach. We just define two lattices, one for integrity, one for confidentiality, to ensure both properties will be satisfied. And in particular, for software development, for the system controller, there is a particular privilege. So this is called a downgrade privilege. So this is basically to allow the system controller to change development software to production software. So usually in company you can have a development version and the product version, right? So here the downgrade privilege is to change the development code to production code. Okay, so for these are the labels for the subject with regards to confidentiality lattice and the integrity lattice. And then for the objects, you can also have the two lattices, right? So these are the labels assigned to the objects for confidentiality lattice, the two-dimensional lattice. And this one is the labels for the integrity lattice assigned to the objects. Right, so once you have these two lattices, then you can enforce both rules. For the first lattice, you make sure you always have for confidentiality, you always have a no read up, no write down. For the second lattice, you make sure you always have a no write up, no read down. Then we can have both confidentiality and the integrity achieved. So you don't mix the two lattices together, because in this case, if you mix them together, you cannot achieve anything because the rules are opposite. So we separate them. So one line is for confidentiality, one line is for integrity. Right, so that's the Lipton's model. And then the last model we will look at is the Chinese wall model. So this Chinese wall model is to basically to handle the so-called conflict of interest, right? So this is some sort of a dynamic model, but the dynamic here, the meaning of dynamic here is different from the dynamic we mentioned earlier. So here dynamic means the access control policy actually will change based on the user action. If user performs some action, then the access policy will change. So that's the meaning of dynamic in Chinese wall model. This is to handle the conflict of interest. Basically, if say some data set they have conflict of interest, for example, if you have different banks, so if you have a consultant who want to access the data in different banks, right? So in this case, actually there can be conflict of interest because the two banks they can have conflict of interest. So in this case, so the consultant actually can only access one of them. But at the beginning, so the consultant actually can access either data set. However, once the consultant has accessed one of them, then the policy will change. Now the consultant will not be allowed to access the other data set. So the policy will change dynamically according to the action performed by the user. Right, so this picture illustrates the idea. Right, so we have three conflict of interest class here. So the first conflict interest class is for banks. Second one is for gas companies. Third one is for oil company. So originally the consultant can access any data set here. Any data set here. However, so as far as, for example, the consultant access bank A's data, then the policy will change dynamically. So in this case, if the consultant has accessed the bank A in the first conflict of interest class, then the policy will now change to disallow the consultant to access the data of bank B. That means based on the action performed by the user, the policy will change. Originally, the consultant can access either bank A or bank B, but as far as this consultant access one of them, the other one now becomes like restricted, becomes like blocked. So the user can no longer access the other data set. So this is to ensure the conflict of interest. So for each class, so if the subject access any one of them, any one data item below the one conflict of interest class, then all the other items in the same COI class, conflict of interest class, now becomes like unaccessible by the user. So this is the central idea of this Chinese wall model. Okay, so that's the last model, and then this slide is just a warning. So if you have you see this CWM, this can be an acronym for different models. So just pay attention whether this is referring to Chinese wall or the Clark-Wilson model.